So welcome to Bunny's Designs. This is a live show with live people. It's recorded for Ustream.tv and also for YouTube for people to watch at their leisure. I'm using a natural sponge and I'm soaking the paper. Now normally I drop it into a tray, or I used to do this in the bath, but I saw somebody do it like this and I thought, oh, I'll try this because it might. I'm just going to turn it round because I've got this bit which I'm going to cut off so I can hold this down. Now you don't really want any bits because they're going to show up, but it wants a good saturation 2 or 3 times to get an even coat. And I tend to go crossways because horizons, we don't. And the reason this has got tape around it is I did it and it didn't take because I messed it up. I tried it a different way and it didn't work. So now I've got 1 or 2 bits on there, but I'm not particularly bothered about that. I'm going to live with that. So just take that off there. Right, and what I did have is I've cut gum strip, oopsie, which is brown paper basically with a gum, and it comes in a roll like this. So before you do this, you cut 2 pieces for the side and 2 pieces for the top and bottom, and then basically you just run your wet sponge across it. That's all it needs. And then you want to put this down here, like so. And then you need to, it's best to use a cloth. And you don't want any air in, and then you want to rub your fingernail. Your thumbnail is best to get a really crisp edge. And then you want to kind of, I'm going to do the side pieces next. So you don't wet it till you need it. Wet that end like this, because this is what I made this too. I made it too wet, so it wasn't sticky as much as it should have been. So that was my mistake. So you want an even amount of, and it gets very sticky. So you want to go down this first and then smooth out all the air so we get a really nice coating. Now this is just ordinary hardboard. It's ordinary hardboard, and again I can feel that that's sticking a lot better. I put too much water in it. I dunked it, and you don't really want to dunk it. So again, thumbnail. So that is going to dry. And then this one. And it doesn't really matter if it's not perfect, but I did it with the wet one. I should have done it with the dry one. Now this might not work because I might have wet it too much, but hopefully, and I've got some bits on it, but this particular one is just a practice. And then the last one across the top, and it makes it really, really sticky. Now this one's going to have to go across the top. Oopsie. Now you need to dry them flat, and I've never done it like this, so I normally do it a different way, so this is just to practice. But you don't want any air holes and you want it as flat. So last time I used a wet cloth and it wasn't any good. You need a dry cloth. And then I'm just going to rub that down the edge to get a really smart edge. So I did damage that page a little bit, but I can live with that. So it's buckled a little bit, but hopefully this is going to be nice and flat. And when that dries, it will dry flat. And in theory, it should look like this one. As they used to say on Blue Peter, here's one I did earlier. So this one, and it's not brilliant because this is the only board I could find. My husband couldn't find the others and I couldn't get out to find them. I do have some drawing boards, which are thicker than this, and they are perfect. Now this is a bit scruffy on the outside, but I've done the same thing. Now I did wet the whole page in a dish of water, or you can do it in the bath. I know some artists that put some cold water in the bottom of the bath and they do quite a few all at once. And you dunk the page in, you hold it by its corner and it drips off the other corner. So it looks like this. And then when that stops dripping, or when it slows down, you turn it back the other way. And what this does is it gets all the water off the surface first, but then this end's going to be drier than this end. So then you tip it the other way, so the water then can naturally disperse back. So by the time there's a few drops at that side, it's become an even wetness. Naturally, it's dripped out naturally. And then I actually dunked the paper, but you can see it's too wet. Look, it hasn't stuck at the ends. Luckily for me, it's stretched it. It's completely flat. So the idea is that you just wet the gum strip, and that makes it better. So I'm just going to put that in my water. So you can use this sponge for all sorts of other things. Now I do have a few marks on here, but again, I'm just playing about with this really. So, and it's extremely flat. I can put a wash on it and it's not going to go anywhere. Hopefully it's not going to go anywhere. And so I can do as wet as I want on this page. Now the other way of doing it is just working a little bit wet. You don't have to. So that's preparing this. Now this will take overnight to dry, and it wants to dry flat. Now I have in the past dried it leant against the radiator, but I wouldn't do that unless you were kind of a bit desperate to do that. I wouldn't use a hairdryer and I wouldn't use a heat gun because it has to dry naturally. So if you look at this particular book, we've got so many different types of watercolor. There's wet in wet, there's wax resist, sponging, line and wash, back runs, splattering, hard and soft edges, variegated wash, glazing, wet on dry, wash off, body color, and masking, and dry brush. So dry brush is what I like because it's the one you can get the most detail with. So you're using a really, really fine brush. I mean, obviously you do a bigger wash to start with, but you end up with just dry paint, barely damp. Just excuse me a second. I record every Thursday all day in the UK, 9 till 6 or 9 till 5, and I have my Thursday throat, so apologies. So this is recorded for Ustream.tv and also for people to watch at their leisure on YouTube. And apologies on YouTube, the quality of the videos when you upload them are not in HD, so the sound is a bit tinny and sometimes the movement's not as good. I can't really do that much about that. I have a Logitech C930E and I have a Logitech handset, wireless headset, and I've got a little kind of soft sponge on the end to kind of muffle the sound a bit. And that's about as much as I can spend on my equipment, so apologies. It's really easy for me to record on Ustream and then upload, because just at the moment the hands can just about do what it does. I don't do any housework, I don't dress myself, my husband does that. I just use my hands for art, and if I had to start using the computer and moving things and editing hour-long videos, I wouldn't have the hands to do any art. So apologies for that in advance. Hopefully there is a little bit of content and the sound isn't too bad. So I was going to have a quick look through all my colour books while we're doing watercolour. I mean, I have hundreds of books. I have a bit of an obsession. I've just kind of recently stopped buying books. But people buy me colour books. This one was an interesting one because it has the wildflowers of England. So I kind of thought, oh, this would be quite good for colours and things. And it's very good because it does show you, and I think that's masked out as well. So it does show you some quite nice skills of how you want to work. Some are wet on wet, some are wet on dry. And there's some, you do have to do a really nice thing. But one thing it does show you is you do have to have a decent drawing first, and that's where our colour books come in, because we have nice drawings in our colour books so we can print, so that we can just get on with painting. Whereas when you're doing your own watercolours on watercolour paper, it's slightly different, but you do need a very faint good composition to start with. And then the techniques on here is like a flat wash, a gradiated wash, grading from light to dark, two separate colours together, blended wash, and then there's variegated. This is a loose wet wash where colours aren't mixed but blended. This is what I kind of like. What else have we got? That's another page. We've got stippling, load a small amount of paint onto an old brush or sponge, and pounce up and down the surface. This will allow some of the background colour to show through, adding texture to your painting. And then we have highlights. Lighter watercolour pigments can be dissolved and lifted off after it's dried. Wet areas can be removed with a clean brush, a blot of water, anyway with a dried tissue. So I've done that. It's not as bright, but sometimes you don't want it white from white. You can also use masking fluid to protect the highlighted area. Just remember to peel off when the paint's dry. So you've got to make sure your paint's dry, but I said that before. There's hatching and cross hatching, so you can go one way stronger or you can go both ways. Wet in wet. This process is applying pigment to wet paper. The wetness of the paper will affect the size and the clarity of the marks. The wet in wet techniques can be applied over existing washes provided they are dry. Wet the paper with a large brush and paint into the dampness. The soft marks will look well in subtle backgrounds. And then we've got dry brush. So there's although this is a little book, and I don't think these were professional watercolours, it came in a little box. It came in a fake book. There's a little bit about a colour chart there. So you've taken vermilion red to cerulean blue. So you've got the darker colours here. Then we've got the yellows and the blues. So it's quite a nice little book. It talks about brushes, it talks about the paper. It talks about stretching the paper. Light and medium weight paper needs to be stretched. But as I showed with these last week, this one was 300, 140 pounds, 300, and that's curled slightly. So that means if I wanted to put another wash over, it will well in the middle because it's curled very slightly. And this one is 300 pounds, 638 GM, rough, and that one has very slightly buckled. So again, if I was doing a wash, it will move. And all I did was a wet blended wash on there. And I was playing with washes and clouds, and I didn't leave a gap here, so the blue and the yellow went together. Didn't leave a gap, so we had that merging there. And then on one of them I left the gap. I think it was this one. So you can see a fine horizon where there's hardly anything. I didn't play on those. And then I was using this one to play on this one. I think this one's 140, this one. So you can see I was playing, before it went on here, I was just checking the colour that was right. And I was working from this palette. So my purples for my berries were here, and then my greys and browns for here were down here for the little doors. But I don't like working like that. It didn't really do anything for me. And I do work a different way, but I did like the fact that you could put a wash on it. So I think what I'm going to do, and again I was practicing on these bits of paper first. Now luckily somebody gave me a whole box of these and I've just recently found them. So that's a £90, but if I'd have stretched it, I mean it's not as crinkled as the other one. So if I'd have stretched it, it would have been fine. So it's good to have a bit of a play, even if you cut one piece up. It's probably better to cut one sheet of good paper into several squares and then have a play. Do a wash on one side and then have a play on the other. And get to know the paints and get to know the brushes and get to know the paper. And then when you've learnt the marks, then you can start to colour a composition. But it's better to play with marks first. Because I was having a play with different highlights and then to get them darker and build on them. So I should have made them all really pale and then gone in with more detail. And that was just the one that I was playing with here first to build up colour. And I'm still not happy with it, so and I'm not sure if it's the colour that I don't like or it's the composition I don't like. I haven't decided. So I may have to finish this one and then I can look at it and think it's the colours, it's the composition, so I can change those things before I do a really, really best one kind of thing. But I'm still playing with these colours down here and putting almost French ultramarine down here to make some really dark spaces. So that's the preliminaries of just making a board. So this one's already been done. Let's have a look at this one. And this one's almost flat. You see there's just a bit of buckle, but I only did it probably 20 minutes ago. So hopefully that should dry flat. But this one is perfectly flat. So I might have a play with this one. And because it's actually on the back of the clip, and luckily it's like a tight drum, even though this was missing, luckily I managed to get a good seal around it. So I probably should have moved it further down. So if I put this on its end, the other thing to do if you haven't got books is, for goodness sake, don't buy them anymore, is to have a look through YouTube. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos of people doing watercolors. So there's going to be a slight incline on this, which is okay. I can live with that. If I didn't want that, I'd just have to put a pair of pliers so it's flat. So then when I do a wash, things are going to stay. Now, if you wanted dramatic rain or sky, you can tip and you can move all your watercolors in different directions, which is why it's good to have it on a board. I think I'm going to be quite happy with having it like that. Most artists do have their boards like this, just a slight incline, because you can see your paper better than you can when it's dead flat. There is something about looking at something like this, but when you're straight upright, you need it just a little bit. So there's something about having that. Now that's going to drive me insane. So I'd have to have something that wouldn't move. Masking tape probably. Something that won't move would be probably better. So that's okay. And mine's on a slippy surface, so that doesn't help. So I've got OT towel, which is perfect. I've got 2 water brushes and a background big brush, but you could use any kind of water brush. This is supposed to be a water brush. These were cheap and cheerful. Anything that's big. Could be really soft if possible. This is a series 628 long stroke ox hair, pony hair, sable, anything that's soft, squirrel hair, anything that's really soft, because when you do oil painting and you do acrylics, you have a rougher surface, you have a canvas, and so you use a hog hair or something with a bit more oomph. These are like it's a bit like having a stiff wired haired dog to a fluffy kitten. That's probably the best variation. Having said that, do not pull the hairs from your dog or your kitten. But that's to give you some indication. There is another set that I haven't got, and I may try, which is half and half. So you've got half man-made and half natural. So I may actually get a set of those if I find any at a reasonable price. There's another set that you could use if you didn't want to have these expensive ones, and I didn't buy these, they were in a set. I did buy these Art Master Pearl Series 11, and again they're lovely and soft, and they have a point, so they will hold a lot of colour and a lot of water, and then they will release that whether you use the fat bit or the point, and they're quite good. And I've got my 3 new sable brushes, and I also have it says it's a rigger. It's a Daler Rowney Rigger Aquafine. I don't know what hair it is. It doesn't say. But I was using it. No, I wasn't using it to mix. I've got just a very cheap brush here, quite soft. That's what I'm using for mixing the colour, because I'm not going to mix colour with my sable brushes. So that is all I need. I think I used that one because it was just a bit finer than the other one. And my colours have been out here a few days. So because I had all these colours, I've put them all out. So I've got pale cream, lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, I think that's gamboge, alizarin crimson, rose madder, cadmium red, that's alizarin crimson. There's another red in there, but I can't really think what that one is. There's a purple. Sorry, that's French ultramarine. but because I've mixed it with the alizarin crimson, it's looking very dark. That one looks like cobalt blue. That one's cerulean blue. I've got two greens. I think I bought a sap green and a hooker's green. My cadmium yellow I don't put over here. I put over there because it's with the browns. Because I class that as a pale brown straw colour. So my yellow ochre, I think that's like a red brick, or it's Indian red. There's quite a few different names for that one, but it's like a brick red, so it's good for bricks, it's good for fox colours, and it's good for other kind of really deep browny reds. Then there's two browns. One's warmer than the other one. Raw umber and raw sienna. And I play with these, and I add blue to the brown to make grey. So that's my Payne's grey. That was one of my paintbrushes on the floor. So, and then my yellows I put to my greens. So I haven't used the original greens. I've used them as a mix to get some paler colours. So you can do all sorts of things with them. And if you wanted a darker colour for shadows, I would then add red to my greens. So a touch of red into here would give me a shadow. So again, it's quite nice to have a big space. If you were doing up the wash for the backgrounds, they're on here. Because you need a well, because you're going to be very wet. I mean, this is a week old and it's still just wet, hasn't dried out. So you do need wells, but I kind of like working quite dry, so and detailed. But if you want to do wash over wash over wash, you do need your wells for obvious reasons, because your watercolor is just going to run off this. Most of them, I remember telling you that they won't dry out. The greens dried out, and the blue and the brown, but these two have remained sticky, because these are professional watercolors. So that's why in my little book of watercolors, they haven't dried out. Some of the yellows do and some of the yellows don't. So, and that's to do with the pigment. Oopsie. I knew we'd have an avalanche at some point or another. Sorry about that. So there are all the things I need, and really you shouldn't put anything on here, because if anything's dirty it will mark it. But they are my supplies, and you also need quite a lot of water. So you need really two wells, one for dirty, one for semi-dirty, and then you go back into the final one. That's always the one that you start mixing with. You must end with that one, because these will get dirty when you're doing watercolouring. And then if you want the sponge squeezed out dry, you can have some cloud effects and some stippling for trees. So you can use sponges for all sorts of things. So that's my basic setup for my watercolour play with my stretched board. Thank you for watching.